Hi, today we are talking about the work in chapter 3. So I hope that you've read the work, that you've gone through it, and now I can explain the things to you, and hopefully if something didn't make sense to you, that you'll understand it now, so I've explained it. First of all, the chapter takes a look at diffusion. So before we're going to get into the definition of diffusion, there's a concept that you have to understand, and that is the different states of matter. We're going to be looking at solids, liquids and gases. All matter is made up of particles. In solids, for example, particles can't move very far, and these particles are held together with very strong attractive forces. Thus there's low kinetic energy in solids. If we take a look at liquids, the particles are able to move more freely and they are spaced further apart. Thus there's medium kinetic energy as these particles move around. In a gas, for example, particles move very freely. There's almost little to no attractive forces, and there's a high amount of kinetic energy between these particles. So now that we've explained the different states of matter, it will hopefully help you understand the diffusion a little bit better. So let's get into the definition of diffusion. So diffusion is the net movement, or the sum, the total movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration down a concentration gradient. A concentration gradient just basically means that it goes from high concentration to a lower concentration. So let's explain this by taking a look at an example. So we have a plant, and plants need carbon dioxide for respiration, and thus they produce oxygen as a byproduct of their respiration. How does carbon dioxide get into the plant? Well, carbon dioxide is in a lot higher concentration in the air outside the plant's leaves. It's able to move from this high concentration outside into the plant leaf, which has a low concentration of carbon dioxide. Thus here we can see a concentration gradient, and it moves from high to low. It moves down the concentration gradient. How does oxygen get out of the plant and into the air, which is then available for us to breathe? Oxygen is in high concentration inside the plant leaves because that is where it's being produced. In the air it's relatively lower. Thus oxygen is able to diffuse out of the leaf and into the air for us to breathe. So it moves from high concentration in the leaf to lower concentration outside the leaf. Oxygen moves or diffuses down this concentration gradient out of the leaf. Okay, so if you understand diffusion, it's not going to be very hard to understand osmosis, because osmosis is basically just the diffusion of water molecules. The definition says that it's the diffusion of water molecules from an area of high water potential to an area of lower water potential. Now don't get confused when we talk about high and low water potential. A high water potential simply means that there's high amounts of water, and a low water potential simply means that there's low amounts of water. So water will always move out of an area of high water potential away from the high water potential area. When you take a look at osmosis, you'll see a partially permeable membrane comes up a lot. Now a partially permeable membrane is simply a membrane that has small pores in it that only allow water molecules to pass through. It's too big for bigger molecules like sugars to go through. So examples of partially permeable membranes are like your cell membrane or viscous tubing, and they only allow water to go through. We're going to take a look at plant cells and how water moves into and out of plant cells. So when a plant cell is placed in a hypotonic solution, hypotonic simply means that it is an area with low amounts of solids. It's a dilute solution. So then water is going to diffuse into the plant cell because there's more solids inside the cell than outside the cell. Thus water is moving from an area of high water potential, more concentrated water outside the cell, and into the plant cell into an area of lower water potential. So it's moving down a concentration gradient. Once a plant cell has taken up a lot of water, it becomes pressurized, and this pressurized state we call turgor pressure. If we put a plant cell in a hypertonic solution, a concentrated solution, a solution with lots of solids, then water will move from inside the cell to outside of the cell down this concentration gradient. Okay, so if we go and take a look at animal cells, basically the same happens, same concepts apply, except that animal cells don't have a cell wall like plant cells. Thus, animal cells can't become pressurized, they can't reach turgor pressure. They will actually burst if they become too pressurized. So if you place a plant cell in a dilute solution, it will take up so much water via osmosis that it will lyse or burst. If you place a plant cell in a very concentrated solution, a plant cell will actually become, I don't want to say dehydrated, but water will move out of the plant cell to such a degree that the animal cell will actually shrink. If we place any cell in a isotonic solution, or a solution with the same amount of same concentration of solids outside and inside the cell, there will literally be no movement of water because there's no concentration gradient. Okay, lastly we're going to take a look at active transport. Now this active transport is the movement of particles through the use of a transport protein and energy. The definition says that it's a movement of molecules or ions into or out of a cell against the concentration gradient using energy from respiration. Now what this means is a plant cell or animal cell will want to accumulate certain molecules. Active transport works through the use of a transport protein which allows molecules that would not be able to, that are too large to diffuse into the cell across the plasma membrane. It allows them to go into the cell through this transport protein when energy is added into the equation. So you can see here that we already have a high concentration of molecules inside the cell and a low concentration molecules outside the cell. Thus the concentration gradient for diffusion would actually be this way. But active transport allows the molecules to move against the concentration gradient into the cell through the use of energy. Let's take a look at some questions from past papers. So question 9 asks us to take a look at the diagram, this diagram, and it asks which type of cell does the diagram show. So before you try and determine what type of solution the cell is, take a look at what type of cell this is. So we can clearly see that there is a cell wall here, and thus from that we can conclude that it is a plant cell. So immediately we can eliminate A and B because those are animal cells. So if we take a look at our options, C is a plant cell in a concentrated solution of salt. So if there's salt outside the cell in a greater concentration than inside, we know water will move via osmosis outside the cell. And that is exactly what's happening here. Our plasma membrane has shrunk because the movement of water from in the cell outside the cell causes this shrinking. Option D, let's just quickly run through that, is a plant cell in pure water. Well, if the plant cell was in pure water, then it would have been in a very dilute solution, and thus there would have been more solids inside than outside the cell, and thus water would have moved into the cell, causing it to have become turgid. So we know our answer here is C. Question 10 asks us says the following: two identical cylinders 40 millimeters long are cut from a potato. one W is placed in water and the other X is placed in a concentrated sugar solution. The question asks, what are the lengths of the cylinders after 2 hours? So this is our starting length. We've got 2 cylinders, W. Let's work with that one first. W is placed in water, thus there's going to be more solute inside W than in the water, so it's being placed in a dilute solution, and we know water is going to move down a concentration gradient from high water potential to low water potential, from high water potential outside the potato to a lower water potential inside the potato. So W is actually going to grow in length because it's going to absorb water, and that's going to make it become larger. Then X is the other cylinder of potato and is placed in a concentrated sugar solution. So now there's more solids outside than inside the potato cylinder, and thus water is going to move outside this potato because water is in a higher water potential inside the potato than outside, and thus the potato X is going to shrink. Don't worry too much about the exact numbers. They are only here to illustrate the purpose is if the potato is remaining the same, if it's getting smaller or larger. So think in those terms to come to your answer. Okay, we're going to take a look at one more question. Question 9. The diagram shows an apparatus which can be used to demonstrate osmosis. This is what we are looking at. The question asks us, after 1 hour, what would happen to the liquid levels in the glass tubes? So these are the glass tubes 1 and 2. That's the liquid level currently. So is that liquid level going to rise or fall? Rise or fall? So this is a partially permeable membrane, and inside this number 1 we've got a very concentrated sucrose solution. Inside number 2 we've got a concentrated sucrose solution. So both these are concentrated. This is more concentrated than this. So water is going to move from an area of a high water potential to an area of lower water potential. That's the definition of osmosis. So water is going to move high water potential, there's more water outside this than inside this, because this is a concentrated. Concentrated means there's more solute to water. So water is going to move into the glass tubes, and that's cause this to rise. And the same is going to happen here, except it's going to happen to a slightly lesser degree because this is not as concentrated as this. So glass tube 1, the water would rise a lot higher than in glass tube number 2. So if you take a look at our options, the levels in tube 1, it's going to rise. So those are 2 options, the C or D. In glass tube 2, it's also going to rise. So it can't be that one, so it has to be that one. So our answer here would be D. Alright, so I hope these concepts made sense to you. Study hard and go and get those good marks.